whatever the complication happens, it's a totally iatrogenic. A healthy patient was coming to us in the need of child or in the need to become much more happier in the life, and we do stimulation, we do all sorts of things. So whatever happens in the due course of the time is considered as a iatrogenic complication. So when we do IVF, why we are scared? Because there is a stimulation process involved. There is an anesthesia and the surgical process involved. There is a potential to have ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and the end result what we desire is the pregnancy. So we should be assured that we have created a proper environment for the pregnancy. Then the patient, whether she is able to carry the pregnancy safely, and then we should not forget the treatment what we are giving. There is a likelihood of multiple pregnancy, so all these things should be thought and taken care of. What are these special situations? So these special situations could be fertility related, that these could be medical conditions, and then it could be pregnancy related, because we have created the pregnancy. Now the complications can happen during the pregnancy also, which were never thought for. So I would consider whichever are the most common situation, either fertility related, medical conditions, or pregnancy related. So the most common condition we see in day in day out is, which forms majority of our OPD, is the polycystic ovarian disease. Here usually a young girl who comes to us for the fertility problem. We all know we deal with lot of poor responder. We feel helpless. This is a condition of having plenty. That means there are many eggs or follicles. Either they are not ovulating, she's not getting pregnant with IUI, and she's coming to us for IVF. These are the young girls. They may be obese, we have to think about it. They may be associated with the glucose intolerance, or maybe diabetes, thyroid, or hyperprolactinemia. So two things about the weight, and if they are impaired glucose intolerance or diabetes, we have to put them on the metformin or this required treatment and then proceed further. Suppose if we have decided for the IVF because she is not able to conceive by previous treatments, then what first thing come in my mind is the fear of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So that has to be thought about it. Maybe when we do IVF, there should be a change in protocol than routine protocols. There may not be a fresh transfer. We have to change the injection and the protocol, and we may have to freeze all the embryos. So this all comes with the expense of a timeline and expense of the money and use of certain resources, which patient has to be informed and counseled much before. So when we have a PCOS lady, it is a now proved beyond doubt that it has to be a antagonist protocol. That means you call your patient on second, third day of your treatment, and according to her profile, decide the dose of stimulation, that is recombinant FSH, maybe in 150 to 225 doses. And when we use 6-day antagonist, so that is the way the protocol should be there. There is no place for long protocol here. So antagonist protocol should be the treatment of choice. And why antagonist protocol is so much favored in cases of PCOS is, earlier it was thought, antagonist protocol was thought that it reduces the pregnancy rate, it reduces the implantation rate, it only brings the bad outcome. But as we have mastered in the antagonist protocol, there were so many RCTs and randomized control, and they have compared between the long protocol and antagonist protocol. So antagonist protocol is always associated with significant reduction in the incidence of OHS. And another difference what has made in due course of time is what is the GnRH agonist trigger. So if you get a PCOS lady, I think it before you start stimulation, the protocol should be, it will be a antagonist protocol with a lower dose of stimulation. It should be a GnRH agonist protocol and freeze all, and that should be explained much before to the patient. There should not be any ifs and buts, and which can save us from OHS. There was a time when GnRH agonist was never thought of as a trigger, and it was always HCG we in our own career we have seen a lot of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It is the most disastrous thing to see in our practice. Even if you take a decision to freeze all, but if you have given HCG as a trigger, OHS can happen, and we all know OHS can lead to lot of morbidity and mortality. Morbidity in terms of renal problems, thromboembolic episodes, and even in the developed countries, OHS related deaths have been reported. So, if you are thinking about stimulating a patient of PCOS for IVF, so there is a three level of safety. First is to give an antagonist protocol, then use agonist as a trigger, never use HCG as a trigger. And in case if you are and don't ever transfer the embryos in the same cycle, so it is freeze all. And in the luteal phase, you can use antagonist for another 3 days, which will take care of further luteolysis, and chances of OHS for all practical purpose are almost nil. Then this is a Cochrane review in 2011, which has clearly established it as a level one evidence that if you use antagonist protocol in the PCOS ladies, so chances of OHS is very low than the long protocol patient. And this is a review article which was published as a in 2010. So if you want a OHS free clinic, one of the 10 commandments to avoid OHS is the GnRH antagonist protocol and replace HCG by the GnRH agonist trigger and freeze all policy. Then, somebody's mic, they have to unmute this background noise. And then another common condition what we see day in and day out is endometriosis. And endometriosis, what we see very often is they have visited one clinic, they have done a laparoscopy, second clinic, again laparoscopy. So from when? From endometriosis? I have to repeat again. Okay. I'm sorry, I think I was for a while I was on mute. So we were discussing about the endometriosis. So what I have discussed is the repeated laparoscopies are not required. Maybe if you have seen the patient first time, transvaginal scan diagnosed endometriotic cyst very well. Grade 3 and grade 4 endometriosis, IVF is the best treatment. But if the patient is visiting you first time, then probably laparoscopy is a good idea. But repeated laparoscopies are not at all required. If you have doubt about the hydrosalpinx, before posting them for surgery, you should have discussed with the patient and deal with hydrosalpinx then and there only. Always do an AMH before laparoscopy or taking them for the treatment. It gives a very important tool for the decision making in counseling, because many of the endometriosis patients, their AMH might be low.
Hello.
And it helps us in making the decision for the a treatment. Grade 3, grade 4 endometriosis means there are a lot of additions. There's a chocolate cells. These are the patients, usually they do not conceive naturally or by the IUI treatment. And along with that, if AMH is falling, sooner the better, and IVF is the best treatment. And then along with the endometriosis, usually adenomyosis is very commonly seen. There is a reduction in endometrial receptivity. So if AMH is low, there are many studies which say that you use a long protocol. You use 3 doses of Lupron depot and then start stimulating. But in low AMH patient, probably it is not a good idea, because they may not respond. They will go into ovarian suppression. So you can do a direct stimulation protocol for them and freeze the embryos, because these endometriosis patients, if you transfer the embryos after depot down regulation, 1 or 2 doses or 3 doses, because then endometriosis, the inflammatory response will decrease, and the endometrial receptivity is much better. So, and there are so many studies which says if you use 3 doses of GnRH agonist depot, like 3 months, along with the aromatase inhibitor like letrose and all, and you use them for 3 months, the endometriotic and endometriotic and adenomyotic lesions will reduce, their inflammation will reduce, and then you get a better success rate in the IVF. So probably if the AMH is less, do a stimulation protocol, make embryos, store them, and then before transfer, you can use this uh, depot down regulation and then transfer the embryos. Now, in the current scenario, when lifestyle is changing and we are getting so many young cancer patients, and because of good chemotherapy, surgery, diagnosis, early diagnosis, we have a lot of young cancer patient survivors. And after some time, fertility is a desirous part of human life. So these cancer patients should be counseled for fertility preservation, and I think all of us should make a conscious effort with the oncology unit. The problem with fertility preservation is there's a lack of awareness from the oncology unit. They do not refer. Another, even if they refer the patient, it has to be done as an emergency process. Most of the time, it is fear psychosis which is prevailing in the patient's mind. They are just seeing the imminent death or morbidity related to cancer, and they do not come forward for the fertility preservation. And these treatments are not one point program. These treatment, they need time. So patients sometimes they do not accept the treatment, but then it is needed of an hour. If we are looking forward for the fertility treatment, it is always an antagonist protocol. That means patient come to you with the periods and you start the stimulation, because everything is done in 10 to 12 days. And either if she's an unmarried girl, we freeze the oocytes. If it's a married couple, we can do the embryo freezing. According to the patient profile, you can choose the conventional protocol, soft protocol, or mild protocol. Earlier, it was thought that we can only start stimulation when they come with the period. So even if you patient has visited you, we were giving them withdrawal bleeding, and they were coming for the on second, third day, then around 10 days of stimulation, then oocyte retrieval. So it was taking more time. And we were earlier giving HCG as a trigger. Luteolysis take a lot of time. Now in the oncofertility cases, it is always GnRH agonist trigger, because luteolysis happens very early and they are ready for their cancer treatment very early. So that is a conventional protocol. And if they have hormone sensitive tumor, to keep the estrogen low, always start the aromatase inhibitor, that is letrozole 5 mg throughout the stimulation. It keeps the estrogen level low. So most of them are like breast cancer, estrogen receptor positive patient. But now as the knowledge is accumulating, there is a random start protocol. If they are coming in the late follicular phase, we can start. If they are coming in the luteal phase, we can start. And what is catching up nowadays is the dual stimulation. That means you do one stimulation in follicular phase and you do another stimulation in the luteal phase. It was thought for poor responder. It is working out very well for the cancer patients. So how we do it? It is popularly known as Shanghai Protocol as well. How we do is from day 3, day 2 of the follicular phase, you start the normal stimulation. Then instead of HCG trigger, we give always as a GnRH agonist trigger and do the egg pickup after 36 hours. And after egg pickup, give the 5 days gap for the luteolysis and then start again the desired stimulation protocol. So the entire concept is in our body, there are multiple waves of folliculogenesis. So there is a luteal phase wave, there is a follicular phase wave. So in the month, we can collect egg twice. So it works out very well as because when in the cancer patient time is a major concern. It's a little blur slide, but there's a collected evidence there that in luteal phase and the follicular phase almost similar number of oocytes were collected. Even if we compare embryos from what has been collected in the luteal phase and follicular phase oocytes, the embryo quality and blastulation rate were almost similar. Then there is a SWOT analysis which analyze whether dual stimulation is a very good protocol. Yes, it is very good protocol, especially for the cancer patients, because higher number of oocytes and embryo you can obtain per ovarian cycle. It is actually 2 cycles in 1 cycle. More competent blastocysts are collected per ovarian cycle, and there is no difference between competence of oocytes between the follicular phase and luteal phase. It reduces the time to get the collect embryos, more number of embryos, better tolerated. It reduces the dropout rate because you will practically not get a cancer patient who can come to you twice for 2 months together. So it is a very, very good protocol for the cancer patient, but the cost effectiveness we have to see, because as such it is a 2 cycle consumption. So whether how you are going to judge the cost for it, that you have to see. But for cancer patient, it's a very good protocol. Then there is a, we always talk about cancer patient, but we should be aware that fertility preservation is now a social phenomena also. So it is not always cancer. There could be a lady who is unmarried, or she is married but she's not thinking of pregnancy, she's touching 35 or above. So this is a social phenomena. Then recently I have come across one patient, and you will get it very often. These are the autoimmune patients where their ovarian reserves are falling. They may be due for toxic chemotherapy. So autoimmune diseases is causing another thing. Then there could be hemopoietic diseases where there is a stem cell transplantation, renal transplantation. These kind of patient also needs uh, oocyte freezing before. And there could be medical condition like beta thalassemia, mosaic turner. We know they attain ovarian failure very early. If there is an impending ovarian failure, these patients also can be advised chemotherapy. And then what we have discussed before is the endometriosis. These patients also, when we know their ovarian reserves are going to fall, we can always freeze the oocyte, because getting married and planning pregnancy, it's a big social event. Maybe your timeline may not permit you. So then we can freeze the eggs and suggest them. So fertility preservation is not only oncofertility, it is now having multiple ways. So whenever we are thinking about the fertility preservation, so basically there are two popular ways. One is doing a conventional stimulation and storing mature oocytes, M2 oocytes, if she is a unmarried girl, and if she has a partner, we can freeze the embryos. But there is a ovarian tissue cryopreservation, and if there is no time, we can even do in vitro maturation. That means without stimulation, we collect the oocyte and we can freeze the immature oocytes, or maybe culture them in the lab and then freeze it. So these are the various ways. And whenever your patient comes, when she's ready for the pregnancy or she's cancer free, you can transfer those embryos, or you can use those oocytes, or you can transpose the ovarian tissue what you have stored before. So now the another condition I would talk about is the medical condition. So this is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, ASRM committee opinion. What it says is reproductive liberty is a core value of the fertility care. So it talks a lot about right of individual to make informed choices. That means we cannot deny patient just because they are high risk. It's our duty to explain them what risk she is undergoing, and clinician can decline the care if there is a high risk of mortality or morbidity. Otherwise, we have to explain and go forward because it talks about reproductive liberty as a core value. So most commonly, I'm talking about what is seen most commonly. So I would consider age as most commonly high risk because we get to see a lot of patients of 50 and above. Then another common condition is hypertension. So whenever you make it a habit to measure the blood pressure, whenever you diagnose hypertension, take a physician opinion, do necessary tests, make sure that BP is under control, take a history because many will hide the history. They might be on some antihypertensive drug which are not feasible for the fertility treatment and pregnancy. Make sure you shifted them to the safer drugs when their BP is under control. Then only you start the treatment for them. And I personally take a lot of time, counsel them. I usually do not transfer two embryos for the hypertensive patient because you have to make sure they conceive as a single pregnancy because superimposed hypertension is very common in the pregnancy, and if they conceive twins it will come very soon. So we have to discuss with that, and we should always take a physician opinion from them and make sure you measure BP and shift them to the medicine which are technically feasible with the pregnancy. If cardiac illness is there, then definitely you have to take a cardiologist opinion and discuss about them because pregnancy is a burden. Treatment may not cause any problem, but then she has to carry the pregnancy till term, and it could be a load for her. So that you have to discuss and have a fitness and should be documented in your records. Then another most common condition is the diabetes. Diabetes mellitus is very common even in the young patients. Very often you get 300 400 sugar. Make sure the diabetes is under control. Most of the time patients, they don't want to accept that they have diabetes. They do not want to shift themselves on insulin, but if sugar is not controlled over oral medication, then it is the high time they have to shift to insulin because till the sugar level comes normal, we all know that lady, even if she get pregnant, the diabetes will not cause infertility, but then it is a cause of increased teratogenicity and increased congenital anomalies in the baby. So if we are thinking about protecting tomorrow ourselves from the legal suit, we have to make sure that her sugar is under control. And many a times they do not show the prescription, they hide the history. We have to be very careful. They might be on the other glycemic agent which are not permittable in the pregnancy. So you have to make sure either they are only on metformin or they are on the injectable insulin which are permitted if the lady gets pregnant. So make sure diabetes is under control. Then hypercoagulable states are very common, and history of DVT and thromboembolic episodes. So we will discuss one by one about them. So age, you have to follow the law of land. Till now in India, there is no law about the age, but the clinic should form their own SOPs, and we do not entertain any patients above 50 years of the age. So it is duty of the doctor to collect the age proof from the patient and either Aadhaar card or whatever. And whatever your SOP follows, we personally do not give treatment to 50 and above years. If you are taking a patient who's above 40, please do a physician checkup, do ECG, basic workup you should do. She should be medically fit to carry the pregnancy. And you have to counsel them and document counseling because if they are old, what could be the future problems? And they should know that what is it about getting the becoming mother or father at the advanced age. Then the modifiable risk factors I spoke, one of them is obesity. You have to counsel the patient well, and if they are not losing weight, you can always document in your report that it has been counseled, and then I am starting the treatment. And again, diabetes and hypertension, make sure BP is under control and diabetes is under control. Then only you initiate the treatment. Uh, then another common condition, which is hypercoagulable state, we find during our patient profile is SLE and antiphospholipid syndrome. We usually check during repeated IVF failure or recurrent implantation failure or recurrent abortion patients. We find them, and sometimes patients come with a history of a thromboembolic episode or DVT. Then also very often we check these. So SLE and antiphospholipid syndrome directly may not be the cause of infertility, but then it can cause amenorrhea. In between, it causes flare up. There could be a renal inefficiency associated. The toxic chemotherapy associated with the SLE treatment can cause ovarian failure. Then these are potentially hypercoagulable state. And if OHS happen, it will like putting a fuel in the fire. So those things we have to think about it and plan a treatment. So if you diagnose a patient with SLE or they are already diagnosed, so we should know either they are on HCQS treatment, which is safe during fertility treatment also, but we should always get an opinion from rheumatologist. Azathioprine and methotrexate, they are not feasible during pregnancy. So if they are on these treatment, we should not initiate the treatment. Sometimes in flare, they put them on cyclophosphamide. If they are putting on cyclophosphamide, always discuss with the patient because it can cause ovarian failure or insufficiency. These patients, we can do IVF or oocyte cryopreservation first and then shift for the long-term cyclophosphamide therapy. Now, how to diagnose the antiphospholipid antibody syndrome is either they have a vascular thrombosis of any tissue or organ. There is a pregnancy morbidity, that means one fetal death more than 10 weeks when fetus was normal, more than three abortions, and one premature delivery where the neonate was normal or less than 34 weeks of gestation because of eclampsia, severe preeclampsia, placental insufficiency. And the lab criteria we all know, IgG and IgM more than 40 GPL and beta 2 glycoproteins. There should have been two tests 12 weeks apart, then we consider them antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. So there are clinical criteria, lab criteria. So when to start the treatment in SLE patient, they should be inactive and stable phase. There is no history of venous or arterial thrombosis. Uh, then there is no history of lupus exacerbation on estrogen. They should be normotensive. So what are the guidelines? If you have a SLE patient or they have this history of thrombogenic episodes, then how to start? One is you have to start on the mild stimulation protocol or low dose stimulation protocol. Then another thing is never give HCG as a trigger because you cannot afford to have OHS in such patient. So you have to always give a GnRH agonist trigger. Then freeze all policy, never transfer in a stimulated cycle. If it is a natural cycle IVF, which normally nobody does, otherwise never transfer in a natural cycle. Whenever you transfer, do a single embryo transfer. And during stimulation, because we all know when we stimulate the coagulation, it's a hypercoagulable state in the body. So we have to start them on anticoagulation. It could be a low molecular weight heparin. Most of the time, they are under supervision with rheumatologists. They are usually on the low dose steroids or immunosuppressant. Then, suppose if you are planning a frozen embryo transfer or they are transfer from the ovum donation, then always try to do a natural cycle. That means you see the patient when it is near ovulation, you see the follicle, do the follicular monitoring, and you follow them with an LS surge. Then you can modify, maybe give a HCG as a trigger and plan your embryo transfer and the progesterone. And natural estrogens are well tolerated, but synthetic estrogens are usually such patient, because they have a high probability of thrombogenic conditions. So synthetic estrogens are not well tolerated, and even if you have to give, transdermal route is much better. And if we are doing a luteal phase support, use progesterone, natural micronized progesterone, and use them vaginally. So these are the few things we have to keep them in mind. And if we have to put them on low molecular weight heparin from the day we start the stimulation. We have to continue 1 day prior to pickup, and we have to start 12 hours after pickup again. So, and after transfer also, we have to start low molecular weight heparin, and throughout the pregnancy also we have to continue the low molecular weight heparin. So these are the safety protocols which we should be taken care for the SLE or antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. But if there is an acute flare, we should not do. Uh, these are the patients, they can have advanced renal disease. So these patients should be investigated very well. We should check the blood pressure. If BP is very high, there is a pulmonary hypertension or severe heart disease, or there is a major thrombotic event in the past, you can always take the opinion of hematologist or rheumatologist. But mostly, if the major episodes have happened, you can defer doing the treatment or stimulation in them. And the anti-Ro or anti-LA antibody positive patients are also as a very high risk during the stimulation. And we must be aware, if you induce the pregnancy also, the complication rate of placental insufficiency, miscarriage, IUD, hypertension, preeclampsia, IUGR is very common. And there are certain subtypes of SLE where the congenital heart blocks in the baby are common. So these conditions should be discussed with the patient and then proceed for the treatment. Uh, then why we are worried about always hypercoagulable state stimulation, why should we be more careful, is we all know what stimulation does is, if we are aiming for the multifollicular development. So as the number of follicles will increase, the estradiol level is also high. So it is almost in the mild stimulation also, the estradiol level can go up to 1000 to 1500, and in conventional stimulation 2000 and above will be the estradiol level. So whenever the estradiol levels are high during stimulation, there's a rise in fibrinogen level, there's a reduction in antithrombin 3, there's increase in the whole blood clot lysis time, there's an increase in platelet and 1 Willebrand factor, and decrease in the fibrinolytic activity. So altogether, there is a hypercoagulable state induced by the stimulation. So there was a study published in the RBM Online, whether if we put them an anticoagulation and do IVF, then whether it is feasible or not. He has studied 74 high-risk cases, but he has used mild stimulation. Either they were on warfarin if they were going for surrogacy, otherwise they were low molecular weight heparin. There was no bleeding or thromboembolic episodes noted in these cases. So it probably it is safe to do stimulation protocol in select patients when we put them on the anticoagulation therapy. Then another common condition we very often get is a uterine anomaly. So if you do your own TBS scan, in TBS scan you can always have an eye that this lady has a uterine anomaly, septum, bicornuate uterus. You can always have doubt or diagnose during the TBS, unicornuate uterus also to some extent. So if you have any doubt, anyway, these patients will be sending for HSG. A good HSG film almost clears your doubt. And then if you have any doubt, you do a hysterolab. But doing this TBS scan and HSG tells you what to expect during the hysterolaparoscopy. So you are all ready with the gadgets and treatment, because if it is a septum, if you are doing your hysterolab as a place where all instruments are there, you can do a septal resection then and there. But if it is that is the only anomaly which is correctable. Or sometimes uterine synechias and all that also you can have an eye when you do a HSG film. So I feel whenever you have a doubt about uterine anomaly, do a HSG film and then post them for the hysterolab. So you what to do, correct septum if it is present, synechia if they are there, you have to resect them, and they may need a second look hysteroscopy. Then unicornuate and bicornuate uterus, you can make sure the diagnosis by the histrolab, but here we can't do much, all because they have a propensity of a preterm labor. We have to counsel them for the single embryo transfer, and maybe if the gynecologist agrees with that, maybe cervical stitch in the mid trimester. And always screen them for associated renal anomalies, do a whole abdomen scan done. And if there is a complete uterine agenesis, they need surrogacy or uterine transplant. So all these must be spoken and documented. Then another thing what we very often we get is the viral infections. So your patient could be HBsAg positive, HIV positive, HCV positive, and all places lab protocol or before initiating IUI or IVF, I think it's a universal protocol where we do this serology testing. So if the couple has been found to be positive, either male or female with the HIV, so we cannot deny them for treatment. They have a protective right. We cannot deny the treatment, but what we should know about that how to go about it. Suppose if it is a male partner who is positive and the female is negative, so whosoever is positive, you should send them to infectious disease specialist or a physician and get a approval whether we can proceed for the treatment. How they give the approval is always they check about the viral load and CD4 cell count. If CD4 cell count is high and viral load is low, less than 200 copies per ml, these are the safe patient to start for the treatment. If if the viral load is high and the partner should be started on high amplification ART and re-evaluated again, and once they are considered safe, they can come for the treatment. And before starting treatment for preceding 6 months, he or she should be on low viral load, on high CD4 cell count. That means these are stable. When it comes to the treatment, there are so many uh, papers from Africa and Europe where IUI has been documented. But I think in America and India, we do not prefer too much IUI because it's not 100% sure that we can prevent it and the prevalence is not so high. So in Africa, they do IUI, but in India, ICSI is the preferred method. But then you have to counsel about the risk of HIV transmission to the female offspring and the partner. You can consider other safer option of donor insemination or adoption. ICSI, although preferred and chances of transmission is almost negligible, but nothing can be 100% foolproof. The patient should be counseled for the safe sex practices, and men at least should not have any sexual contact or infected with the infected men or women in past 5 years. There should not be any concomitant sexual other diseases. Women should be negative for 2 HIV tests at 6 months interval. Then you can initiate the treatment. And you have to take a opinion from the infectious disease specialist. And if she recommend pre-exposure prophylaxis for the women, you must allow them to take that. But if the woman is seropositive, because here woman has to undergo a procedure in the OT, the oocytes have to go in the lab, embryo. So we have to be more careful because sperm processing and doing ICSI to some extent it saves lot of viral exposure. So what we should do is if your IVF lab is not equipped doing such cases, you can refer them to different lab. Otherwise, you have to create a separate workplace for such patient. Do them at last. At the time of oocyte retrieval, there is lot of virus can be in follicular fluid and granulosa cells. So always do a ICSI because you denude the oocyte, wash them again and again, and then do a embryo transfer. Then again it depends on the your policy whether you can freeze the embryo. Some labs will not freeze HIV positive patient's embryo, but if you are freezing you have to have a separate cryo container for the HIV positive patients. So another common condition which is seen day in day out is the HBsAg positive. That means the man or woman has a HBsAg infection. Although this is very prevalent, around 5% of the world population is suffering, but fortunately there is a vaccine available. So when we investigate both men and women for HBsAg, the seronegative partner, if not immunized earlier should have been done. There is a three vaccine protocol is there. You should finish those vaccine and then start the fertility treatment. Rule out the active state of infection. That means most of the patient they get HBsAg infection, and most of the time it is a carrier state. There is no active disease in their body. So how to check for the active state is, you have to do a HBeAg test, and you have to check for the anti-HBC IgM. If IgM is positive or EAG antigens are high, then only it is a acute or infectious state. So if these are the say, you have to deny the treatment for a while. You can send them to liver specialist, hepatologists. They take good care. But if they are not in active state of infection and otherwise stable patient, you can proceed with the required treatment, because as such HBsAg is not the cause of infertility, and it is very common. And whatever treatment they are up to, they need IUI, IVF, ICSI. Only precaution what we take is we put them as a last patient, and we do not process the sample together with other patient. And if the couple is HBsAg positive, if embryos are required to be frozen, we have a separate cryo container for the HBsAg positive couple. Then fortunately it is not so common. There is another liver infection, is the hepatitis C virus. This virus can cause similarly acute and chronic liver disease. It is a major cause of liver cancer. It is bloodborne, and it can be transmitted through a small amount of the blood also. Uh, Although semen transmissions are not so commonly documented, but it can go through IVF or IUI to the female partner. There is a documentation of the vertical transmission as well. And currently there is no effective vaccine against HCV. So you have to include HCV investigation also in your protocol. And if they are HCV positive, and most of the patients are asymptomatic, but you have to see whether they are in active state of disease. If they are in active state of disease, you have to again send them to the hepatologist. They check via RNA. If RNA load is higher, they are put on antiviral therapy. Antiviral therapy, what is used in HCV, is very toxic medication, and it is a very prolonged treatment for 48 weeks. And after finishing, whether it is for male or female, after finishing the viral therapy up to 6 months, we should not start the pregnancy treatment for them, because ribavirin is the most common drug used. It is contraindicated in male partner of a pregnant female or during the pregnancy, because the drug is believed to cause new mutation. The pregnancy testing should be performed monthly, and pregnancy should be avoided for 6 months after discontinuation of therapy. Uh, Although very few studies have been done, but that it does not increase the adverse outcome in the pregnancy, but there is a potential risk of vertical transmission. In HCV positive women who decline therapy, or in those who fail to achieve sustained virological response to the therapy, the risk of vertical transmission is greatest when maternal viral blood load exceeds 106 copies per ml. So there is no vaccine available to infant, and so we should keep all these things in mind. Otherwise, it does not cause infertility per se, but then it affects our treatment, because we have to take the necessary precaution. Thank you very much. I have included most common medical or fertility problems which we come across day in and day out. I hope I have done justice to the time you have devoted. You are please feel free to ask me the questions. No, how I have this one. This one chat here, no? Uh, we got one question from the uh, if husband is HbsAg positive carrier and wife is immunized, yeah, you can advise them natural conception or IUI. They will be treated like any other patient. If they need IUI, we'll do the IUI. Only precaution what we take here is because we are doing a processing in the lab. So we have to separate that semen processing from another patient. So you have to give your appointments like that. Probably you will take it as a last patient or spaces differently. You cannot process too many samples during the same time which are seronegative. Otherwise, the HbsAg positive, one couple is positive, one person is positive and other is immunized. They are like any other normal patient. Any other question? Hmm. There is a question here, even in IUI cycle, if previous
Hello,
abortion, yeah,
hello,
previous, yes,
hello,
yeah, I could
hello,
hear you.
hello,
Hello, I
hello,
can hear you, doctor.
Yeah, please, you can ask the question, doctor. You can hear.
hello,
Yes,
hello,
doctor, please go ahead. Yeah.
hello,
Message her on WhatsApp. Well, we can hear you, doctor.
hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am, OHS.
Huh?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can very well hear
Hello.
you, ma'am. Huh?
Okay. OHS. Hello.
Huh? We can
Hello.
hear, please. Yes, ma'am.
OHS is like how will you manage and how will you diagnose?
See, nowadays, one thing, I will answer your question. See, if you are doing an IUI stimulation, okay, so IUI or IVF, if you have more than 15 follicles in your scan, so these are the patients who can go for ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Okay, so nowadays, if you see such patients during stimulation only, best idea is to defer giving them HCG trigger. Okay, decide not to see if it is a IUI cycle, better you cancel those cycles. Okay, but sometimes if by any means if patient is not agreeing or you have to go ahead with the IUI treatment, give them GnRH agonist, don't give them HCG. So practically if you don't give them HCG, OHS usually will not happen, but then you have to track those patients. Maybe 3 to 5 days later you call them for a follow-up visit. If you are doing IVF, then again it is same policy. You give them GnRH agonist. Most likely, to my experience, none of them get into OHS. But suppose by mistake, if you have given HCG, and patient usually present on the fourth, fifth day of the trigger, they will say, "Doctor, I'm feeling very much full. My tummy is swollen. I cannot eat. Sometimes I vomit. Sometimes they come with breathlessness." These are the symptoms. If any of your patients, then you should call them immediately to your uh, dismiss. No, no, correct. So when you ask for a, you will see large ovaries with plenty of free fluid around uterus, and as you see, the, there could be urine, there could be a suprarenal, infrarenal, subhepatic flow. So there is a peritoneal collection. If they have a breathlessness, they could be having a pleural effusion. Then you can do CBC. So hemoconcentration and leukocytosis you will find in the blood test, and these should be managed with if it is a moderate OHS, you can manage them on OPD basis. We have to give them saline and this Hemaxil or albumin, and you have to daily monitor them on the basis of symptoms or the blood test. If it is severe, then you have to admit them. There is one question where Dr. Veena has asked that even in IUI cycle, if previous abortion investigation show LA positive, do you start aspirin or low molecular weight heparin? Yeah, definitely I would start.
Hello.
Hello. I would start.
Hello.
We can hear you, madam. We can hear you. Please ask, ma'am. So this in IUI cycles
Hello.
also.
Ma'am, when do you do tapping?
Tapping, it depends on the symptom.
When do you do tapping in OHS?
Suppose if
When
your
do you
patient.
do tapping?
Ma'am, that's only I'm telling you. Suppose your patient is diagnosed with OHS. If she become breathless, and there is a abdominal cavity is distended. So
ma'am,
that,
when do you do tapping, and who has to do the tapping?
Madam, it depends on the skill set. See, we usually do by ourselves. Fortunately, I have not done from past 5 years, but when we were doing, because now it is very easy. If you make a conscious decision of giving GnRH agonist prior and freezole, probably you will not need it. Shall we assume that we have had a OHS case? See, we are an IVF center and we have a transvaginal aspiration system with us. Probably in a general hospital or a gynec unit, you may not have it. Then you have to call a radiologist. Then they are master in doing trans abdominally also. So there is nothing that you cannot do or I cannot do, but it all depends on the skill set. If my patient get into OHS, I will do myself, but I'm more comfortable doing it vaginally because we have a transvaginal probe, we have a OPU needle, and we have entire setup attached with that.
You after the tapping, do you keep the drain or
no, madam, drain is not required. Sometimes you have to do a tapping again. Like suppose your patient.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you, ma'am. Drain is not required. Drain is not.
Hello.
Yes, doctor.
After the tapping, you keep the drain?
No, ma'am, it's not required.
After the tapping, you keep the drain, continuous drain?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
But again, collection can happen until you have to repeat that HCG action?
You have to repeat the tapping again because it can cause infection. So.
Okay.
Usually, if it is a pregnancy with OHS, then only you will get into such problems. Otherwise, you put them in one antagonist and take care of ring. You give them saline, you give them Hemaxil, albumin most of the time, because one good with OHS is a self-limiting problem. But with pregnancy, if you have transferred embryos and she is pregnant, then we get into such problems. So that's why prior decision and cancelling or taking a decision about agonist trigger is the best thing we can do to ourselves and to the patient. One more question by Dr. Veena. If we previously operated for endometriosis and repeat endometriotic cyst, can we refer for IVF directly? I think that is the very good idea, because repeated operation will not do any justice to the patient, because it's a ovarian surface tumor. Endometrioma is nothing, it's a ovarian surface chocolate cyst. So more you operate, you have to use the cautery, you have to peel off the endometrioma, and we cauterize on the ovarian surface, we peel off the ovarian surface, and it is very well documented that after each laparoscopy, the ovarian reserves falls further and further. Sometimes some endometriotic cyst fills very, very rapidly, and it is very difficult for us to do our stimulation and monitor the stimulation. In those cases, what we do is just before stimulation, transvaginally we aspirate those endometriomas and then start the stimulation directly. Any further question?
Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
In a patient with HCV infection,
Yes, ma'am.
the method followed is same as in HBsAg.
Yes, ma'am. But then same. But this infection, because acute episode is little bit more dangerous, so we always take a opinion from hepatologist. Usually HBsAg patient, if their LFTs are normal and they are not in the acute stage of the disease, we ourselves only take the decision. In lab, the all methods are same, ma'am.
This HBsAg positive, you told antibodies and IgM to be seen.
IgM is the antibody, and HBeAg we check. So if it is, that will tell about whether it is active or not. So if it is not an active disease, then we can treat them.
Okay. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, again there's a, yes, ma'am.
Many patients. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, many patients, they come with repeated abortions, like bad obstetric history. All
Yes.
the tests are negative, and they conceive, but that doesn't proceed. Even with some heparin, and also there are some failures.
Ma'am,
What
if
to do?
all their tests are normal, even the hysteroscopy, all coagulation profile, everything is normal, and even the karyotype is normal, then if they want that, they have to, it has to be through their own gametes. We can always do an IVF with PGS. You do IVF, make embryos and check for the PGS. And suppose if patients are not affordable, then it is a blind treatment, like you can replace one of the gametes. Sometimes donor eggs work for them. But then if they are wanting to do their own gametes, then IVF with the PGS, it works out very well, ma'am. Very often we get such patients, recurrent abortion. If they have to have a euploid embryo when we do PGS.
Okay.
Dr. Yes, ma'am.
PGS is not done routinely for all the donor.
No, ma'am. Because one is donors are usually young, so and they usually are fertile patient, and otherwise also it looks a good idea to do PGS routinely, but everything comes with a cost. It add on a cost for the patient. So in general, we do not do PGS for any of the patient unless they are repeated IVF failure, they have a history of anomalous baby or repeated abortion. Otherwise, it add on to the cost, ma'am. If we inculcate all the technology in the beginning, and for donor cycle, usually outcome is good. Abortions are very, very less. So routinely, it's not required.
Thank you. When do you do this endometrial receptivity, madam?
Ma'am, if the patient has 2 or 3 transfer failure with a good quality of embryos being transferred, then we do endometrial receptivity assay. That is ERA. We do it. Not for routinely, because another, it's again a costly investigation, and by a Spain-based company, Algenomics. So it is not required as a first-timer patients. So those who have 2 transfer failure with good quality of embryos, then we do. the ERA testing.
Thank you.
There is another question by Dr. Veena. If you see additional adenomyosis, then what are the tips for the stimulation? Dr. Veena, I would not change anything in the stimulation, but probably with the adenomyosis and endometriosis, it's a good idea to do a frozen embryo transfer. You do stimulation, freeze embryo. If one cycle you get less, probably you can do the 2 cycles. What I found in my clinical practice, and as per the literature also, you give them depot down regulation, maybe 1 cycle, 2 cycle, 3 cycle. If adenomyosis is large, you can give them up to 3 cycle also. And along with that, if you put them on aromatase inhibitor, that is Letovol daily for 3 months, their adenomyosis and endometriosis will not disappear, but the inflammation in and around will be less. And if you measure the uterine size also, there is a small reduction in the uterine size. And then if you do the transfer in such patients, it works out very well. Usually I do for those who have a large uterus or they have adenomyosis and 2-3 transfers are not successful without any reason. These patients, it will work out very well. But then stimulation wise, I would not change my stimulation protocol.
Hello.
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Hello. Any
Yes,
benefit for embryoscope in the IVF lab? Embryoscope?
Yes, ma'am. Embryoscope, as we know, it is a time-lapse technology. So there are benefits, means after keeping them after ICSI, we need not to take out the embryos every day. Routinely, what we have to do is we have to take out embryos and see them under the microscope. Embryoscope is a closed compartment where on the touch screen basis only you can see your embryos every day. And it gives you a kinetics, so it helps you in a embryo selection, because other method you are seeing a day 3 embryo, you are seeing a day 5 embryo. Here you can play like a video recording and you see some embryos may look good on day 3, but if you see their cell division, they may not be good. There may be an abnormal cell division which normally by routine we do not catch up. So if you are looking for a single embryo transfer, or you have to select an embryo which is so it helps in embryo selection. And then another is we are not taking embryos in and out again and again, so undisturbed environment it presents. So theoretically they present a ideal culture condition for the embryo. So there is a slight increase in the pregnancy rate, although when they claimed that it will be 15% and above. But of late, I think the experience what we are gaining is they are not so magical, but yeah, they offer some kind of advantage over the routine incubators. And in today's COVID time, they are recommending embryoscope again, so that you are not touching things again and again. You directly take them out and everything is seen from outside. So
do you have embryoscope? Do you have?
Yes, ma'am. We have embryoscope. But if you ask me personally, I feel even the benchtop, we have series of benchtop incubator, MINC incubators. They work equally good as embryoscope. So, but we do have.
Okay.
There's a question by Dr. Bhavya. What are the genetic screening tests for donor sperm? See, normally genetic tests are not being done routinely for the donor sperm or donor egg. But then if you see the sperm bank detail correctly, only thing they do is the thalassemia screening. And some sperm banks, they do even the karyotyping for the donor. But if you want a specific genetic screening test, I think it is the recipient who has to order. We have to place those test requests beforehand, because most of the genetic tests take 2 or 3 weeks or a month's time to get the report, and it is the sperm bank which has to arrange for you. But routinely, other than thalassemia screening, other tests are not done, and few sperm bank I know they do the simple karyotyping. One more question we received is, if one cycle failure in spite of good embryo, is it worth working up for the autoimmune disease? See, again, it is like the same way when we were PGs. I think we used to start workup for the patient after 3 abortions. Then we became 2 abortions. And if you sit in a big city and do a practice among little hi-fi clients, now people are insisting to do everything after 1 abortion, which is such a normal finding. So it depends on the how apprehensive your patient is, or probably if she has associated symptoms, you can always ask for the symptoms, malar rash, phototoxicity, or if she has diabetes, thyroid, these kind of disease, or a family history, you can start workup early. So it all depends, because these tests are very costly. So it's up to the patient and between you. Any further questions, ma'am?
Ma'am, the one patient I have, husband is coming and telling that he's having a history of transverse myelitis.
Okay, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm hearing.
Hello? Transverse myelitis. And he is asking whether his baby is going to get it, or she is pregnant, like wife is pregnant. How to go about that?
As far as I know, ma'am, transverse myelitis could be infective or autoimmune. So we have to go and see the diagnosis in the neurology record, because it could be a simple inflammatory episode also, na? The cause of transverse myelitis, and if you think there is a genetic component, if he would have shown to you ask for files, ma'am, because isolated transverse myelitis is not a genetic disease at all, and he has recovered fully from that disease, then probably he can collect the sample as well. If he is having a residual thing and if he's not getting erection and other things, that is different problem. But most of the transverse myelitis are not genetic. If it is a part of some syndrome, then we have to see, because you have to see his neurological record, ma'am. They would have done complete work.
Or should we send it to one opinion for the genesis?
No, ma'am. I think no, a genetist also will not be able to do. First, the neurologist should make the diagnosis. What was that transverse myelitis? If it is a simple infective viral, or just a transient transverse myelitis, there is no need to send them to genetist as well. Because genetist also, if you give them diagnosis, then only he'll proceed, ma'am.
No, they come and ask us, do you think that my baby is going to get it? So what are we supposed to tell at that moment?
No, that's what, ma'am, you have to send them for a neurologist opinion first. What was the diagnosis? What could have been the exact event that time? If it is a part of a symptom or genetic thing, neurologist would opine, then you send them for the, because alone transverse myelitis, we don't know what was the cause of it. It is not genetic most of the time.
Okay. It is not basically genetic.
So I think the work.
If it is autism, if it is a first child is autism child, then what are we supposed to do? Second pregnancy?
Yeah, autism is something very difficult, because even we receive patient, most of the autism, the cause is not found. Sometimes they come and ask us to do PGS also, but for what? So causes we can find out the cause, we can always do it. But if most of the time these are the kind of things where there is no cause or no particular gene has been found out that this is responsible, very few cases we know the cause. So then we have to accept it with a pinch of salt. Yeah.
Excuse me, madam.
Yes, ma'am.
one patient, she was in a first trimester, and she
Uh-huh.
had just general body pain, weakness, and body ache. When her nuclear antibodies were high,
Uh-huh.
they asked her to terminate the pregnancy. Is it necessary?
No, ma'am,
And
if it is anti-nuclear antibody could be high, but then we have to treat them as a like we have to work up on that profile. Maybe we have to start them on steroid treatment or whatever. Rheumatologist has asked them to terminate the pregnancy,
ma'am.
and there were no other associated symptoms like renal failure. Nothing
She
was there.
thinks regular ANC. Then
Huh.
she has to have joint pains mild. Then she has gone to a rheumatologist in Asia, Colombia. They told her
No,
to terminate the pregnancy. Then only we can give treatment for your
no,
rheumatologist.
because as we discussed now, ma'am, if they want treatment in that, because the most of the treatment are toxic, either it is methotrexate or whatever it is, and sometimes in flare-up they start with the cyclophosphamide. So she must be advanced stage disease. So with pregnancy, none of these methotrexate, azathioprine, cyclophosphamide, nothing they can start. So probably she
Yes.
was in advanced stage. If simply antibodies are high, then it is not required. But then she must be having some more symptoms or some renal involvement or something which needs immediate attention. So they would have asked her.
Thank you. Madam,
Ma'am,
success pregnancy rate in unicornuate uterus.
ma'am, pregnancy rate is less and abortion rate and preterm labor is higher. But then if the successes we see, it happens, ma'am. But in general, the success rate is little
Ma'am,
less.
in unicornuate uterus, do we?
Yes, ma'am. See, if they come to me for IVF, I would always do a single embryo transfer in the unicornuate uterus. I will never do a two embryo transfer.
Ma'am, a stitch to be put, unicornuate uterus with pregnancy,
Ma'am,
cervical stitch.
yeah, because they are at very high risk of preterm labor. So whatever we could do with our hand, we should do it.
Usually, if they become pregnant, do we have to put a cervical stitch?
Ma'am, the cervical stitch, entire thing, we cannot say with confidence yes or not, but yeah, unicornuate uterus, I would definitely put that.
No, by chance, singleton pregnancy, do we have to
No,
put a
yes,
cervical
still, ma'am,
stitch
still,
for
ma'am.
unicornuate uterus?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Because what happens is, see, the earlier, if I remember,
Hello?
yes, ma'am. Even sometimes in medical colleges and all, we used to get term pregnancy. You do section, and you will find it is an unicornuate
We have
uterus.
to put a stitch. We have to
Yes, ma'am. Better, ma'am.
stitch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other question, ma'am?
Madam, patient who has conceived with IVF treatment, she is thrombo, thrombo, hemophilia. Blood pressure, HB. ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು thrombo. Sickle cell anemia, thrombo. Major thalassemia. She's conceived after with the IVF treatment. Both of them are positive, husband and wife. Thalassemia major. Now her HB is 8. Now to increase her HB, can we give iron preparations?
Ma'am, thalassemia we can't give, na. It's a iron load. We have to give blood transfusion only.
Blood.
And for IVF also, they should. I don't know whether they have done PGS or not, but if they both are there, it is a high chance that baby will have thalassemia, na. So ideally, IVF with PGS.
They have taken the donor egg, madam. Donor egg.
Then it's fine, but then we cannot give iron infusion in this because it's an iron load overload condition. It has to be blood transfusion only.
Blood transfusion.
Any other questions, ma'am? I must thank all the doctors to be with us for this full session for the whole week and spare time and listen to us. I hope we were helpful to some extent. And I would thank all of you. Today's was our last session, and I thank all of you for sparing your valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.